This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Amy Shah. She is a double board certified medical doctor and nutrition expert. She is trained at Cornell, Columbia, and Harvard. Her background, internal medicine and allergy work. Her book today that we jump into and discuss, I'm So Effing Hungry, Why We Crave What We Crave and What to Do About It. I love having these conversations on this podcast with smart people, anyone that can give us a sliver of information to push back the obesity epidemic, to bring people more in line with where they should be physically, because they would be a heck of a lot happier. I welcome those conversations. Without any further delay from me, let's jump right in and get some of that wisdom from Amy Shah. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Amy, I'm currently in Saigon, Vietnam, and this, by World Health Organization metrics, is the least obese country in the world. My home country, the country that you happen to be in, is the most obese country in the world. There are some South Pacific islands that are heavier than America, but in terms of big population, America is the winner for sure. And so this has been an interesting observation for me for 10 years to see the difference. As a Gen X guy, it reminds me of going to high school in America. I'm just going to lay out a couple things here for you. I can also remember back in the day as a teenager in America, so excited to see the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. And okay, maybe it was a lady that I would never reach in my life, but there was this ideal, and it was essentially thin beauty. Roll forward to my nephew's age now, and Sports Illustrated is completely comfortable putting what can only be described as a morbidly obese lady on the cover. So I lay these things out, the living in a country where obesity is not an issue, growing up in America where, yes, there was some obesity, but it really changed into where today we've got this acceptance. And I thought before we even get into the issue of why people are hungry and the conversations and insights around that, I want to find out how you feel as a woman in America. And I'm looking at a picture of you, and I just saw you on video. You're like a lady back when I was in high school. Okay. So what has happened to us as an opening salvo as I lay these things out?
What a great opening. So as I was growing up, my entire family was in India because my mother left all of her family, and so did my father. But my father came here with his brother, so he had some support system. But we went to India every summer because my mom missed her family so much. And every summer, I would see the observations that you were seeing because we would not go just to the big cities. We would go to the small towns where my mother's siblings lived. And what I saw was a completely different way of eating and living, really. When I was in my schooling, I did nutrition, and then I was in medical school. And we had this small group session one day, and they said, yeah, there was this guy, a very smart doctor named Dr. Strachan in England, in London, who noticed that after the turn of the century, all these, and I'm doing air quotes here, rich kids and their families moved into London out of the farms of England, and they started to develop all kinds of different illnesses than the kids on the farms. And they started to have more asthma, allergies, inflammation issues. They started to be heavier than the farm kids. And so he did all this research for about 30, 40 years. And actually his actual hypothesis didn't come out till 1989, called the hygiene hypothesis, which was that your body, your immune system, and now we know our gut needs stimulation. It needs dirt. It needs people. It needs farms. It needs animals to develop properly. And if you don't get that, then our body misfires and has some inflammatory signals. But what I thought, oh, well, that makes sense. Inflammation causes obesity. And when these kids went into the cities and they were eating cleaner, more refined diets, they got more inflamed, they got fatter, and they got sicker. Obviously, there was lots of benefits of moving into the city for these children. They were in nicer homes and they had more ability to buy things. But that historically explains a little bit, in my mind at least, of what's going on where you are, Vietnam, or where I used to visit, India, the rural parts, why the people seem to be healthier in some ways. Obviously, they have other issues, socioeconomic and other disease issues. But really, when it comes to inflammation and obesity, they have the upper hand. And so that really got me interested in this topic.
I'm in a big city and I can see some outliers occasionally, but I don't observe obesity. And frankly, I can go around Asia. I can go from Tokyo to Beijing. People are bigger in Beijing, a little bit more McDonald's there, but still thin. Hong Kong, Singapore, where I'm at right now in Saigon. And I don't see anything like what's going on in the States. I hear you as you make the case that there are issues going on from where we may have moved to. But I would love to hear your perspective on personal responsibility. Because I think for me, I personally have a hard time getting away from that one because it seems like if people want to gather information, like your information, they want to understand how fasting could help them. They want to understand how exercise could help them. But America and other countries like the UK and stuff seem to be making a conscious choice that, you know what, being obese is okay. I can go on Instagram, and I can't say that I've seen the men do this, but I've seen some ladies do this. I can go on Instagram at over 300 pounds and wear a thong and be confident and say that I'm sexy. There's some psychological elements going on here too, which I don't understand. The acceptance of, I hear the word body positivity, which to me seems like a phrase that was invented to tell people that have not cared for a long while and have gotten overweight that they're okay that way.
Okay, here's a couple things that are going on. And number one is that America, the reason why the body positivity movement started, or at least persists, is because there's a huge stigma with being overweight. And a lot of these girls learn their habits from their parents, girls and boys, both genders or any gender. They learn the habits from their parents. They are eating the foods that they've learned to eat. It's like they are living the life that they were taught. And like you said, they may not look to outside and find different ways. And genetics plays a role in this, not a huge role, but it plays some role in this. What happens is a lot of these girls are stuck in a place where they feel bad all the time, or they're depressed, or they have eating disorders. So I think there's an element of body positivity that can be positive, meaning that I have a daughter. Not that I want her to be morbidly obese, but I do want her to feel like she's worthy at just the way she is. She doesn't need to look like anybody else. And so I think that can be positive.
Can I ask, but when you say that though, let's just assume she's an average female height.
Yeah.
If she's over 300 pounds, that doesn't make you happy. I'm not saying she is. You're a doctor. You know it's terrible for her lifespan.
It's terrible. Our gut bacteria, the ones that help us metabolize, what I argue in the book is that our gut bacteria are sad and inflamed and unhappy. And that's why we are hungry, sad, and inflamed, because the gut bacteria you get from your parents. Over the generations' time in America, we've lost at least 40%, if not more, of the diversity of our gut microbiome. Because when you eat low fiber foods, high processed foods, high sugar foods, you basically kill the gut bacteria and then they don't recover. And then the next generation is starting off with less bacteria and less diversity than the generation before it. So over just a couple of generations now, maybe for us, it's only really been 2 big generations that has been in this modern processed food world. you're seeing a whole change in metabolism. So even though person X in the big inner city, they may actually become obese eating not as many calories as someone who has a very, very robust microbiome. But I agree with you that there is almost a normalization of being obese that is not necessarily healthy.
Why are you not obese? Why do you look like a normal thin lady? Why?
Because I think, like you said, personal responsibility for sure, education for sure. Part of the reason we're addicted to these foods is not our fault, but it is our responsibility to get unaddicted to these foods. So when you're a kid, again, I have a son and a daughter, they're just kids. They're going to pick the foods that give them the biggest dopamine burst. And if they didn't have parents who were policing this or trying to get more whole foods into the home, they would just inevitably pick the things that made them feel the best in the short term. So their addiction to these processed foods would be very high. And so a lot of these kids are growing up in households where either the family is not educated or they don't have time or they don't have the money. It's not just about personal responsibility, which it is in the end, but it's also, you have to learn that we don't all start from the same starting point. It's not like a track where we're all set up in the same exact way. Some people are starting way behind us.
But if we look at the broad macro measures, the trend line in America, if we take everything you just said, the different reasons that may or may not be under someone's control, the trend line says terrible. There's no coming down from obesity. We just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I'll give another example, something that's happened to me in Asia in the last 10 years. So I'm about 6', 6'1", 190 pounds. And let's say my weight has varied on the upside 10 or 12 pounds since I've been here in the last 10 years, but I brought it back down several times. What's really interesting in a culture in a place like Vietnam, and I'm sure this would happen in other Asian countries in particular. I can't speak to other countries. I doubt this would happen in Europe, what I'm about to tell you. But if I have gained some weight, and again, not a big amount, but if somebody knows me, or even if someone doesn't know me, it's very common in Asia to comment on, hey, you're looking a little fat. Hey, your belly is bigger. It's very common. It never really bothered me because I just felt like this is a cultural thing. But I realize now over time, I like it, actually. It's like an army of people keeping you on your toes. Now, I throw this to you, and I know you're in this world a lot more than I am. I'm just making observations. Can you imagine what would happen culturally if we put on the afternoon talk shows somebody that was saying it was okay to tell people they were fat in America?
Yeah, that would not go over well in America because it's almost swung so far from diet culture. 80s and 90s, you remember.
I'm a guy, okay? So I like girls. And the girls in the 80s, normal looking, not today.
But we were in the midst of diet culture at that time too. So everyone knew that America was getting fatter, but it was this very big faux pas to gain weight. There was things like, I don't know if you remember this, but there was this whole thing about, oh, bread was low fat. Everybody would eat bread without the butter. It was the opposite. Now it's like low carb and high fat.
Bread is the worst.
Yeah, exactly. It's the opposite. And I do remember back then, it was exactly what you said. If you gained a little weight in the 80s and 90s, it was faux pas. You got some looks or you got some comments. And I think that what's happened in the US is that now you look around and you see everybody else has gained some weight. So then you don't feel so bad. I'll tell you a story. When I was in residency and training, I trained in Boston and New York, both very active, good, big cities. But I was in training, meaning my sleep schedule was off. I was eating a little more sugar and processed foods because I didn't have a lot of time and energy to cook. And then when I moved to this town called Scottsdale in Arizona, which is very similar to Southern California, where it's hot. So people are wearing very little clothing and everyone really looks fit, or at least the majority of the population in the city. And I remember coming there and being like, oh, wow, everyone here looks really good. And it was motivating to me. It made me think, okay, well, now I'm not in training. I'm going to have more time. I was definitely motivated by the surroundings. What if I had just stayed in Boston or stayed in New York? I would probably not have had that.
It's the peer pressure part. And I think it's a great point. And maybe I am experiencing that somewhat where I'm at now. Look, again, as a man, I make observations of women in this particular culture, and I don't see people in Vietnam that appear to have eating disorders. I see thin people, and I work out with a lot of people that are very strong at a thin weight. On the other side, if everybody is looking bad, then I can look bad too.
I have a question for you because this is something that I've observed when I was growing up. I only went to India, especially in those younger ages. And I remember going to lunch with my cousins, and they hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. And they sat down, they had lunch on a plate, and then they drank a glass of water, and then they were done. And then there was no food again until dinner. And I thought to myself, whoa, they ate breakfast, and then they didn't have any snacks, drinks, lattes, candy, cookies, bagels, and then they had lunch. And then they drank a glass of water. There was no dessert after lunch. And then there was nothing until maybe tea time. And then it was vastly different from my eating habits or what I was observing as eating habits in the US. Is that similar to what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think that's very similar. I was out with a group the other day. We were doing a little film project. And so it was a film crew, all Vietnamese, men and women. And at some point in time, maybe 11:30, we stopped into a place to have pho, just the Vietnamese soup. And that was it. And no one drank any Cokes or anything. Everyone had soup. That was it. Then we left. Very similar, yes.
Yeah. So when I went back to the US, I was looking at what everybody was doing. And I was in school at the time, and it was high school. And so you got to have breakfast at home. And then there was a cafe downstairs where all the juniors and seniors would get food, and you could bring it into class. So you could get a bagel, toast, or muffin or anything like that. And so you brought it to class. They would allow it in the morning for the first period. So everybody would bring something. And then there was breaks and people had snacks in their lockers. And then there was lunch. And then there was snack time. When you got home, you probably got a Starbucks drink, and then you would have dinner. It was literally, you were eating all day long.
It's a multifaceted. So there was issues going on with the body, and then there are personal responsibility issues as well. I want to jump into those in a second, more of that, but I would love to get a big picture also. Given your background, I think I would love to hear your perspective about this too. We just go through this situation. I was in Asia for most of this time, from 2020 through 2022 with the pandemic. You'd think it would have been, because it didn't take much effort to go find medical experts that were saying the people that were having the most problems were morbidly obese. For me, as an outsider, looking at some of the data and some of the reports, it sure seems like that if the people that were getting most sick were not carrying all of this weight, the pandemic would have been something much different. It seems like it was a great opportunity to address the issue of too much weight. My gosh, 3 years passed. And as far as I can tell, all leaders around the country, nobody took it as an opportunity to say, hey, if you're carrying too much weight, you're at more risk for one of these types of coronaviruses.
No, that's an excellent point. This was the opportunity. I think being inside the medical field, I can tell you that the conversations were mostly about, okay, we know we're in this conundrum. How do we get ourselves out? And there was no talk about long-term changes. It was all about, how can we get a cure? How can we solve this immediately? What's the fastest way to get us out of this mess? And so we missed the boat on making long-term changes. I 100% agree with you. In fact, people got more obese and they got more depressed.
It's all compounded on itself now.
Yeah, it actually magnified the issue more than it really helped the issue. So I agree with you. But like I said, it was weird because we always talk about this in medicine. Ever since penicillin was discovered and it revolutionized the entire world, everything now is following the penicillin pathway. It's like, find the next penicillin. You want to solve a problem? It's not about personal responsibility, nutrition, exercise, sunlight. It's about finding the next miracle drug. The whole medical industry is built around trying to find the next big thing.
The next big thing makes a lot of pharmaceutical billionaires.
Yes. And it follows the pattern. Okay, there's penicillin. Then we created another antibiotic. Then we had chemotherapy. Almost every field now has their own version of penicillin, which is the miracle drug that almost eradicated the problem altogether.
Maybe we reach a point on pharmaceutical drugs where we've done the lion's share of the advances that we will do. And now we're fighting on the edges of the bell curve for often issues that don't affect the vast majority of the population. Maybe the vast majority of our great work has already been done. Because so far, lifespans are still pretty steady. We haven't figured out the magic pill to let us go to 150, acting like we're 18.
Pharmaceuticals are looking for that next anti-aging miracle. Like you said, it's built around the pharmaceutical industry. It started because we built a medical system based on solution-based medications that create easy solutions for big problems. And now we've really lost sight. So what medical providers say in America is, hey, we don't have time. We have 15 minutes per patient. The patient comes in, they have diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and heart disease. You want us to talk about diet during that time? And I get it. The way the system is built,
it's almost a triage situation.
Yeah, it's like you're trying to stop them from a car crash. You have no time to actually take apart the car and fix the car or whatever. I think it's not the doctor's responsibility, or at least it can't be in this model. It's either the responsibility of the government, the educators, the entrepreneurs. There has to be somebody else who is going to take charge. Is it government the right person? I don't know, but somebody's got to take charge and say, hey, look, this person did the research. The book is very easy to understand. I don't think that my kids in school learn enough about the basics that they would need to know not to go down that path. I feel like I'm teaching them and I'm writing books for people who want to learn. But like you said, not everyone's going to pick up a book.
You open up a Pandora's box there. That's an entire different issue on education. Let me go to a word that you used a moment ago, because I would like to pick your mind and use myself as an example to find out what I have been experiencing. So, of course, during the COVID time in Asia, we had a brief lockdown in Vietnam and some movement restrictions. I think a lot of people ended up staying inside a lot more, a lot less vitamin D at the exact moment in time we all needed it, the exact moment in time we all needed more sunlight. But speak to more broadly the issue of sunlight, because I would have to say now and across, let's say, the last half of 2022 and into 2023, I've literally built it into my process, sunlight. And the feeling that I have, the response that I see in my physical body from sunlight, it seems as magic as exercise to me. I don't know all the details you're about to tell me about why that magic exists, but I can feel it and I can see it.
Great point. We never talk about it. We don't talk about it enough. In fact, if you go to your dermatologist, they'll say never go into sunlight, wear sunblock. But we are sunflowers the same way animals, plants, bacteria, every living being on this earth uses the sun as a marker for something. So we have a circadian rhythm, which goes on sun and dark cycles. So does bacteria, so does animals, even insects and plants. And what that means is that the genetics of our cells know that certain genes have to be turned on during the day and certain genes have to be turned on during the night. And when you get sunlight, and your cells think it's daytime, when there's congruence, when they agree, your body works really well. The brain and the body are working together. When you try to confuse the body, that's when the problems happen. What I mean is, nowadays we stay up late and we have bright lights, blue lights coming at us at every moment, even sometimes way late into the night. And often We're eating late into the night. We're exercising late into the night. And what that does to our bodies, it confuses it because it's saying the cells are like, wait, but we were on sleep mode where we renew and repair and clean up the cell. And now you're telling us we got to metabolize, we have to work, we have to be awake. It's very confusing. I would equate it to someone waking you up in the middle of the night and asking you to do a complicated math problem. You may be able to do it, but it would take you a lot longer. And then in the morning, you would really be exhausted and angry that you got woken up that night. That's the power of circadian rhythms. 80 years ago, 100 years ago, there was no choice. When the sun went down, you had to wind down your day. You had to wind down your eating. That was the only choice. And then when the sun would come up the next morning, you'd have to wind up your day and do most of your activity, food, and brain work during the daylight hours. We are programmed that way. And so when you try to switch that around, first we found out shift workers. Oh, shift workers have a lowered length of life. They have more inflammatory diseases and they have higher rates of depression. Then we said, okay, well, there's a lot of different things about shift workers besides their circadian rhythm. So they tested it on animals and they tested it on cells. And what they found out is that your body wants to live with circadian rhythms, and it ideally functions when you sync yourself to a circadian rhythm. It doesn't have to be exact sun up, sun down, but it has to be rough.
I have to tell you, whenever I do the 8,000-mile trips, it just makes me crazy because my body has to adjust. There is no hack. It doesn't happen overnight. I don't care what anyone says. There's nothing I can do for jet lag. It just takes time. But it drives me crazy to get the circadian rhythm back to where it should be when I get to that new location. It just makes me crazy.
Isn't it funny how even your gut bacteria have circadian rhythm? So I'm sure you noticed you'll get hungry at strange times of the day.
You want to use the bathroom at strange times of the day? Yes, yes. It's fascinating.
Because your gut bacteria, they take a long time to switch cycle because they are also on a circadian rhythm. Your gut itself is on a circadian rhythm. You probably know more than anyone how important it is to be on a circadian rhythm. And that's why when you see sunlight during the day, especially early in the day, your brain and body are just happy. You get a burst of dopamine and serotonin. You get these hormones that calm your appetite and your mood is more even. There's lots of science, and we know anecdotally that that's true. You feel more satisfied. You feel happier. You feel more even. Your body will respond when you sync better to circadian rhythms.
You know, I can't say that I'm perfect about this. I can think probably into the last 5 years. The first 5 years I was in Asia, I was often staying up to midnight and getting up at 7 or something like that. But I have switched in the last 5 years. I switched because I wanted to go to a particular teacher's yoga class early in the morning. But then I got addicted to it. I got addicted to not only the yoga early in the morning, but I got addicted to the sunrise. But of course, you're falling asleep by 9 or 10 at the latest. So it's a different way. For those people that might want to be night owls and they want to go to all the fun stuff out there at night, okay, you can do that. But you know what? If you do 10 years of that, trust me, when you look in the mirror, you're not going to look your age.
I 100% agree with that. I think that syncing with circadian rhythms, even more so than getting enough sleep, is the key. Meaning you want to get enough sleep also, but sleeping at the same time every night, at darkness times every night, is almost more beneficial than having adequate sleep. Sleeping from 1 a.m. to 10 a.m. is not as good as sleeping at 9 or 10 and waking up at 5 or 6.
Let me ask you a question on sleep also, because I saw this in your work. For those people that do struggle with getting to sleep quickly, because of all the reasons you've outlined, frankly, give some observations, some insights on changing one's ability to fall asleep fast. I think you probably have some insights there.
I do. And personally, I struggle with this because even though you know the answers, it's still hard to put into play. How it works is When your frontal lobe, when your thinking brain, your to-do list brain is active. So you have all the worries about what you didn't get done today or what you need to get done tomorrow. You're living in the past, future. That part of the brain that makes us distinctly human is the part that keeps you awake. It's the part that alarms your nervous system that, oh my gosh, you didn't finish that project that you wanted. Oh my God, tomorrow you're going to have to wake up early. All the worries of the world keep your nervous system activated. One of the biggest tricks to falling asleep, that's why reading is so great, or listening to a podcast, or it's really great, is because you want to get your mind, your attention away from those centers, from the centers that are sensing danger, whether it's danger from a deadline or danger from thinking about what could go wrong. You want to go away from that. One of the techniques I talk about in the book is a military technique where they found that the soldiers, when they were on the field, had real difficulty sleeping because they were in dangerous situations. Sometimes they would be in loud fields. They would have to sleep standing up, some of them. So they found that they were really impaired after a few nights of this. The goal was to try to teach them how to fall asleep, even if they were in situations where they were standing up. The way they did that is using this technique. It's basically the same concept of what I'm saying, is taking you out of your forebrain. I talk about the exact technique, but in short, it's concentrating on relaxing your muscles from your forehead to your chin, to your jaw, to your neck, to your shoulders, to your chest, all the way down and all the way up. And then taking deep breaths and just imagining all either floating on water or sitting on top of a hill. And the whole point of it is, if you don't have access to a book, you don't have access to taking your mind off things, you can't meditate in that situation. Here's a technique to get your mind away from the worries of the world and do it in 2 minutes so that you can fall asleep. I could tell you that in combination with sleep hygiene, which is don't eat 2 hours before bed, keep your room dark and cold. Like, these are things that will transform your sleep. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. Most of people I talk to have not tried these things, even though they said they have.
I have to have dark and cold. And here I am in Southeast Asia,
where it's hot.
You have to work on it. Let me shift you into food for a moment. I saw a mini documentary on YouTube recently about Doritos. Now, my battle with Doritos doesn't exist. I've had Doritos at some point in my lifetime, but my battle with Doritos doesn't exist. I just don't eat them. And it's quite simple for me. I just don't eat them. However, I think for people that do eat them, it's worth considering how some of these foods are constructed. The way I would describe it, the way that I think it goes down, is you get a combination of really eager MBAs and some scientists in a room. And I don't think people are necessarily thinking that, hey, that Doritos chip that I just ate was scientifically engineered to make me keep eating it all the time, nonstop. If people change their frame of reference about how they think about what these foods are that are bad for us and how they're constructed, they're almost like weapons in a way.
Somebody told me something so interesting. They said, lick the top of an Oreo and it'll be salty. And it's because what they do is when they engineer these foods, they try to put all the different tastes and textures into one so that you get a burst of dopamine, which is your pleasure, motivation, craving hormone, that could never be recreated from a whole food. It's got every flavor in one. And the danger of that is dopamine is not just in food. We know that dopamine is our strongest motivator. So, for example, if you're gambling and all of a sudden you get a big win, that burst of dopamine in your brain is the one that's going to keep you going back to gambling after that. You'll say, oh, I want this big thing. And then as soon as it starts to wear off, you're like, okay, I got to gamble again. The same exact thing happens when you eat these ultra processed foods. You get this huge burst of dopamine. And then as it starts to go away, you start to think about how to get it again. And it's the same with drugs, the alcohol, gambling, porn. It's literally the same. Video games. Video game makers and food manufacturers, Las Vegas, all the different gambling, they all have the same strategies. How do you get this person to have the biggest dopamine explosion? Because we know as soon as the dopamine wears off, they're going to be coming back for more. It's an ethical question when it comes to food, but it's a biological hack that they've figured out. So that's why when we were initially talking about America's obesity problem, I kept thinking back to this issue of dopamine explosions. Say you're 4 years old and you start eating Doritos and Oreos and all the different processed foods we have. You get so addicted to this dopamine explosion from the time you're 4 that you just keep seeking it. And you know how dopamine is. You don't just seek the same thing the next time. You want something even better and bigger. And so you keep seeking it more. When I think about the kids in America, it's just really, really sad because so many of them have gotten to the place where they need 4, 5, 6 dopamine hits to get that same explosion. It's like alcoholics, except it's for food.
You know what's so sad about it too? Just like anybody else, I can eat a Dorito and that tastes nice, or I could drink a Coke and that tastes nice. But usually what I have quickly thereafter is the feeling of gross. That was, I understand the feeling of, okay, now that I feel gross, if I take one more Coke, I guess that will make me feel better. But my mind doesn't work like that. I think the thing that's really, really sad, and I brought it up with the COVID time and not taking advantage of the opportunity, is that when people get a chance to get to a certain level of fitness, regardless of their age, when you can really do fitness that perhaps 98% of the population can't do. And frankly, with the massive rise in obesity, saying that one can do fitness that 98% of the population can't do is not necessarily the biggest thing in the world these days anymore. However, when you get to that experience and you can feel that dopamine rush that comes from a great yoga class or a great run or this or that, far exceeds the food part. And that's the sad thing is, I know you're doing your level-headed best, but when it comes to the big leadership positions of power across the planet, we're just not doing it. And I guess, look, those people, by and large, get elected by telling the people that vote for them what they want to hear. So the whole system is insidious.
It is just a shame. I wish there was a solution. In my mind, like we understand alcohol is an addiction problem, cigarettes, alcohol, these are things that we all took seriously as a society. And I think we've done a pretty good job of keeping them at bay. We need to do the same thing with processed food. It's the next cigarettes and alcohol.
Let me bring up another issue in this conversation that's important. And I've had this conversation on the podcast before here, is fasting. I can't say that I'm perfect at it, but I do attempt and I do understand. So the idea of the keto way of eating or keeping your food consumption to, let's say, a 6-hour window from, let's say, 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. I'm not saying that's easy, but there's some magic that happens there as well that I wish people could understand, because it really is a type of situation where if you could keep your eating to that 6-hour window and let the body not experience food for, let's say, 18 hours, your body's going to start to change almost immediately.
Yeah. Fasting, again, it follows that old circadian rhythm theory that your body is meant to have periods of rest and recharge and repair, really. If we lived in an age where there wasn't 24-hour internet and bright lights, and for here it's food delivery and drive-throughs at every hour of the night, then most of us would be fasting overnight for sure, and sometimes even longer. Back even thousands of years ago when food was scarce, there was long periods of fasting for some people, or at least medium periods of fasting, between overnight fast to all the way to a couple of days was not so unheard of. But in America, most people are eating basically 16 plus hours a day. So they're eating their very last dessert or wine right before bed. And then they are getting up out of their bed and eating their first bite of food. And part of that is food addiction, like we said, the dopamine burst. But part of that is not understanding that fasting or having a break from food is actually essential to our bodies. It's like sleep.
Where do you think we'll be 50 years from now? Much worse than we are today? That's my assumption.
What really gets me is that the trends of depression, even more, I'm even not as shocked with the trends on heart disease, but the trends of depression in young adults, they're skyrocketing in their mental health diseases. And it's clear that this is through food, because if you look at processed food and you look at the highest levels of processed food versus the lowest levels of processed food consumption, there's an 80% difference in mental health. So meaning that if you're eating a highly processed diet or something very typical of an American kid who's basically eating 85% plus ultra processed food, you have 80% more mental health days than the person that's on the lowest end of that scale. And I would say, in my mind, that's the saddest part, because these are kids and they're depressed. And what does that mean for their productivity, for their creativity, for their relationships, for their future, when you have a population of children who can't go through a day without feeling sad?
Yeah, it's foreign to me. I can't even understand the concept. Really, I don't think I've understood the concept most of my life. Maybe there was a relationship here or there or something that caused me to feel depressed for a brief period of time. But I look at it like, hey, we're alive. We've got a chance. We can do something. And I think that depression part is really interesting to bring up because there are so many issues there, from food to meaning. What kind of meaning is a young person supposed to have today if all they are told is the Borg gives them a message? Here is your message for the day. Assume this message is true. Do not be skeptical. Do not investigate. Do not check anything out yourself. Just accept the message and eat another cupcake. No wonder these kids are depressed. They need meaning. They need something. They need to believe that they can find meaning. I mean, look, I can see in your life you found meaning. How do we teach young people to do that? There's no leadership there.
I agree with you. And personal responsibility, if you're talking about, say you didn't have parents who taught you, or you didn't have a mentor or a gym coach or doctor or somebody, it is your responsibility to say, you know what, I didn't learn it. I didn't know, but now I know. And there are people who do that, obviously. And I just wish that there were more people who did that. But you're right. If it doesn't come from above, there's a lot of skepticism. A lot of people look at health books and they'll say, well, why didn't the government tell me to eat like this then? Why does the government say something totally different?
The government currently still has a food pyramid that tells us to eat 8 loaves of bread a day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I talk about this in the book, but my first nutrition conference, I was just a young kid and I'm walking into this nutrition conference in Boston, and there are banners from every single company, Kraft, Nestle, every company you can think of that has big food products. They were sponsoring the conference. And this was the largest nutrition conference in America. And I thought to myself back then, that's weird. These companies are sponsoring everything. It just tells you so much about how America works and modern countries work. The plenary session was funded by the companies, and it was just everything. Everything was funded by these companies who have their own interests.
Am I allowed to apply that logic to if I turn on any cable news show and I see sponsored by Pfizer? Am I allowed to apply that same logic?
It's true. I was the first year when I was in training. I did my training in Boston at the Harvard Hospital. It was the first year they did not allow pharmaceutical companies to come to talk to the young doctors. And I remember there was a big hoo-ha because they used to pay for the lunches and they used to pay for all these fun perks. And we didn't get any of that. There was almost like, we don't get to get all the fun stuff that everybody else did. But I really did think that was such a great move because it zeroed into my mind. They said the motto was, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And it's so true. No such thing as a free lunch. They're providing you anything. They're expecting something back. That's just how psychology works. And so when they sponsor these news stations, they sponsor these conferences, they know exactly what they're doing and they're expecting some kind of return.
The audience will have to, and I highly recommend checking your book out. There's a lot of details in terms of why we get so hungry. You really get into the nitty gritty. Let me bring up something, though, in our limited time here as we wind down. Let me bring up something about food in particular, just because I think for people to hear, even if it sounds like it's not a hack, but I know you have 6 foods that you really want people to think about or recommend. Bring people into some of your thinking on foods, even if they just happen to be tuning in casually and they hear you say something and you mention some types of food where it's like, oh, I could make that change today.
The way we eat today is taking out all the fiber and all the things that keep the flavor out. We used to ferment things because we didn't have refrigerators. We used to have fiber in food because that's how it's made naturally. So what I'm saying to people is don't restrict. We've done enough restricting. That doesn't work. We're not talking about you can't eat this additive and don't eat this macro. And what we need to go back to is eating the things that our gut microbiome, immune system, and hormones respond to. And those are foods that actually have fiber. And those are foods that have some fermentation to them. So even if you did nothing else and you just said, I'm going to add 1 serving of a probiotic food and 1 serving of a high fiber food a day, and that you did nothing else.
So basically, go eat more durian and kimchi.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. And you would basically notice that you start to change your mood. You start to change your cravings. You start to change your energy levels. And all of a sudden, it's not about restricting. It's about adding back. We didn't learn this in nutrition school, that it is more about the addition of foods than subtraction of foods. We learned in nutrition school, like this whole thing about, oh, you can eat a balanced diet. You can eat some bad foods and then you just balance it with other. And what I realized is, oh my gosh, everyone is starving their gut bacteria. The gut bacteria is the one that's going to communicate to your hormones and your immune system. If we just taught people to feed their gut bacteria, then you'd be more satisfied, you'd be happier, and you'd live longer.
That sounds so simple.
I know.
We're right back to America is moving in the direction that all Americans are going to be the size of a small car soon. I mean, I don't say that to be mean, but my gosh, at some stage of the game, I think the numbers are 35 to 46%, depending on race and gender in America in terms of obesity. But if this trend line just keeps moving up, can I imagine a future where I walk down the street at some point in time and most Americans are over 300 pounds? If we keep this trend line, is there ever a moment in time where people just say, whoa, this is too much. What are we doing? Or do we just keep going this way? The pharma companies come along and they produce drugs that allow our hearts to still work, even though we're carrying all this excess weight. Is there ever a moment where we just say, what the blazes are we doing?
I think it's going to be a divide. I think there's going to be 2 different populations of people. There's going to be a population that's going to get educated and get healthier. And there's going to be a population that just gets sicker and fatter and sadder. And I think that unless you do something to change that, that divide is going to get bigger and bigger.
Well, you're trying. You're absolutely trying. Your book, I'm So Effing Hungry, Why We Crave What We Crave and What to Do About It. Amy, you dive in deep. We only just touched on some of the issues. You really get into a deep dive in your book. It's a tough topic to bring up with, let's say, an American woman, but I think you are probably in a position, I'm guessing, of being a little torn. If you say too much and you agree with too much of somebody who sounds a little dogmatic and a little strident like me and a little bit like, hey, there's a way we need to fix this, I'm guessing some women would listen to me and they'd be like, that guy sounds like a jerk. I'm just being honest, really. I'm not flame throwing for the hell of it.
I think you make a really good point. You have to tread it very lightly because we're in the backlash period of diet culture. So I think that we're in this weird spot where people are getting fatter and they're getting sicker and they're getting sadder, but we can't be very insulting to the people because there's this huge backlash and there's this huge thought process. It charged subjects, politics, and you can't say things that anger an entire population of people. So you have to be careful.
Now, I do think as a man that I could take any group of young boys, some fit, some fat, whatever, and push them and feel no problem as a man pushing a group of boys. And regardless of whatever they might feel I'm doing to them, however they might feel in the moment, I could get them to trust and I could get them to see some results. I don't know if I'm talking about Mike's boot camp or what, but I could move them forward and I think I could get buy-in. Now, however, I don't think I could go to the other side of the aisle with the female population in America and play that same game. I don't think I could go there at all.
I agree.
So we just need to create boot camps for the boys, I guess. I don't know.
Exactly.
Well, hey, Amy, great stuff. Where can we send people? Book on Amazon, all that fun stuff. But where can we send people? Where's the best website to find you?
AmyMDWellness.com. AMYMDWellness.com is where you can find me. And if you do AmyMDWellness.com/book, you can get all the info and free extra chapter and a lot of extra stuff that might help.
Amy, very cool. I appreciate you coming on.
Have a great night.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.